I'm Alan Colmes, always happy to welcome Gary Johnson. He was the Libertarian Presidential candidate in 2012, two-term governor of New Mexico, sought the Republican nomination, kept out of the debates, went over to the Libertarian side. But you were always a Libertarian. You governed as a Libertarian when you were governor of New Mexico.
Well, I believe so, and it's great to be here, Alan.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
It's terrific always to be on your show.
I appreciate
you for
that.
your constant invitation.
I want to talk about the Boston bombing and the fallout from that in terms of policy and what some people are advocating. But we're just talking about who the voice is for libertarianism in the United States. And basically you're it, although the polls seem to have that corner of the market, but they're not as libertarian really as you are. So it seems as they're anti-choice and on other social issues seem to be more conservative than you.
Well, I think speaking with a broad brushstroke, the majority of Americans are fiscally responsible and socially accepting. And I don't use the term tolerant because tolerant somehow implies that I don't agree with your lifestyle, but I'll tolerate it. Well, you know what?
Yeah, I read that you said that, and I wanted to clarify that. You say socially accepting, but tolerant is not the word?
Not tolerant isn't the word, because that to me, that presumes that, well, I don't agree with your lifestyle, but I'm going to tolerate it. Well, you know what? I really don't care. I really don't care what you do with your life as long as it doesn't adversely affect mine. And when it adversely affects mine, that's where government steps in. Protect us against individuals, groups, corporations, foreign countries that would do us harm.
Do you think then that Ron and Rand Paul are mislabeling themselves when they call themselves libertarian?
Well, what they'll say is they'll say that, and I don't want to pick on, this isn't picking on, I think
I'm not looking to get you in a battle with them.
I think right now anybody that describes themselves as a Republican/libertarian is socially conservative, has a social conservative agenda. And that's not libertarian.
Because you can't be in the Republican Party without that agenda. Really?
Well, so Rand Paul and Ron Paul would say, give it to the states, give these issues to the states. Well, I think that's kind of punting on these issues. I think that marriage equality is constitutionally guaranteed, on par with civil rights of the 60s.
Also, if you have a state-by-state patchwork quilt of laws, are you married in this state but not that state? Some things need to be federally
well, using civil rights as an example, would there still be states in this country today that would, be enforcing segregation? I think there would be.
Well, that's why we have voting laws in terms of voter ID, and why, because of those states where there had been discrimination in the past, according to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, they have to get permission if they want to change voting laws because they have a history of discrimination, which would continue today if allowed to, probably.
And states' rights. I'm absolutely a states' rights advocate, but the federal government has a responsibility to enforce the Constitution.
Well, states' rights, used to be code language for racism. I know you don't mean it that way, but back in the 60s, those who favored states' rights really wanted the states to make discrimination laws.
Well, and it's kind of punting on some really important issues. A woman's right to choose.
Now, as you were coming in, again, I want to get to the Boston bombing and the fallout, but as you were coming in, as you know, we were talking about the abortion issue. Is it a fetus? Is it a baby? And this whole argument is absurd.
As difficult an issue as this is, a libertarian would fundamentally believe that this issue belongs with the woman involved, period. That this is a difficult choice that belongs with the woman. Also the morning after pill being available to young women without prescription. I think that this is empowering for young women.
Just said if you're 15 or older, you don't need a prescription. Now, many people... And it's hard to argue with this if they say, well, if you're 15, shouldn't you get parental permission to be able to go and get the morning after pill?
The reality of the change is that for young women that may have sex for the first time and are not using birth control, that they're not going to end up with an unwanted pregnancy.
And they don't want to go to their parents to have that.
And they don't want to go to their parents. And, when we're talking, I think the reality is that these morning after pills will be available to kids that really want and need them.
So you don't have a problem with a 15-year-old, 16-year-old who's not of legal age having access to this in order to prevent a pregnancy. But do you understand those who say, well, if you're 15, shouldn't your parents be in on this?
And that's why I think we end up with unwanted pregnancies.
Because parents will then force the girl to have the child.
The young woman involved will avoid the confrontation with their parents, and in fact, then
not have an unwanted pregnancy.
Have an unwanted pregnancy.
We are at 877-4-ALLEN, 877-367-2526. Former New Mexico Governor, Libertarian Party candidate for president in 2012, Gary Johnson's with us. Since what happened last week in Boston, and I know you've weighed on this, but the shutting down of an entire city, basically, was that an overreaction to what happened that day?
You know, maybe an overreaction, but certainly this is local law enforcement dealing with this, and I know that federal law enforcement came to bear on this also. But you know what it highlights for me? It highlights due process. This is the Patriot Act, where these guys are being hunted down without a judge looking over the shoulder of, here's what we law enforcement want to do, and a judge saying okay or not okay. And then we have the issue of drones, the notion of, well, gosh, drones coming to play in this kind of situation. Well, if it's a surveillance drone, and it's a surveillance drone that somebody's looked over law enforcement's shoulder, and this can be very timely. I'm not talking about anything that's going to obstruct justice, but just have someone looking over someone else's shoulder. In this case, the judicial branch looking over law enforcement's branch. And now, because of Boston, now you start thinking about armed drones as in lieu of surveillance drones. And if it's an armed drone, then isn't there going to be potentially an innocent person killed in this kind of situation? Yes, there would be if there were armed drones. And now you're then able to focus on what we're doing abroad. Why can't we extrapolate that to our actions abroad, where the drones don't just take out the target, they take out hundreds of innocent civilians, and because of this is why the world vilifies the United States right now.
It's amazing to me that in the year since 9/11, we haven't had more of these incidents. We've had so few of them, and not that we celebrate any of them. I mean, it's heinous, despicable acts, but in a free and open society, we're lucky it hasn't happened more often.
Well, we are, and when you're talking about crazy individuals that want to do harm, is there any prevention against crazy individuals that want to do harm? Really, there are just about 1 million ways to do harm, and if we want to legislate ourselves into trying to prevent these things, we're going to legislate paralysis.
Do you object to the word Islamic terrorist?
Well, I don't object to the word Islamic terrorist, but if we're going to apply it to everyone, yeah, there's an it would be great to use these terms when they really apply.
Well, that's what, of course, people use in this case, because these are people who are radicalized, and I always get worried that this becomes such a broad statement that this is the way we look at Muslims in this country, and there's so much discrimination based on this, when, again, we've got 1 billion Muslims in the world, 7 million in this country, and so few of them commit these kinds of acts.
No, I completely agree. Another thing that came to light on Boston is surveillance cameras. Right? You know what? Surveillance cameras. This is so one of the emerging words here is due process. Oh, okay. So law enforcement goes and says, from a due process standpoint, hey, we want to be able to look at these surveillance cameras. Here's the route taken out. Well, yes, they should be granted that surveillance. But if it's surveillance for surveillance sake, the issue that I have with surveillance cameras is I don't want to be sent a ticket in the mail because I'm driving and I'm talking on my cell phone.
Because they're seeing you through the
because they're seeing me through the surveillance. And what's to stop
those cameras from looking into your window?
Well, it goes on and on and on. But now we're back to, should surveillance cameras be used in a situation where somebody has committed property crime, damage against another individual, done harm, physical harm? Yes, it should be, but it should include due process, meaning a judge looking over the and here's the Patriot Act. Now, the Patriot Act doesn't allow for this. Law enforcement can do this because this is a terrorist act, and there is no due process. And this is highlighting the whole notion of what has happened, the Patriot Act and no due process.
Would you agree that if you're out in public, though, you don't have the expectation of privacy? If you're walking down the street, if you're doing anything in a public arena, you can't have that expectation of privacy.
Well, no, and there is nothing wrong with, if there has been a crime committed, or if there's been a crime committed, that this is now public record, if you will. But we're back to a judge looking over the shoulder of law enforcement, saying, absolutely, you should have access to that surveillance.
I'm Alan Colmes, former New Mexico governor and Libertarian Party candidate for president in 2012. Gary Johnson is with us. I got into a big argument last night with Bill O'Reilly. Nothing new about that, but, you know, they were going on about how welfare's got to be reformed, immigration's got to be reformed. We could probably all agree on that, but as a result of what happened in Boston, because these two, the Tornaya brothers, apparently their family got welfare since 2002, at which point one of the brothers was 7, one of the other brothers was 14 or 15, and then years later, having lived on the government dole to the tune of $100,000 over 10 years, which for a family of 4, 10 grand a year is a lot of money, really, certainly not in Boston. That enabled them to do what they did, so ultimately they planted a bomb, and so therefore the government is somehow responsible because they got this welfare money, but there's no way we could have known, obviously, in 2002, what would have happened in 2013. Obviously, you have a different idea about how to reform those systems, but not on the basis of what happened a couple of weeks ago, Monday in Boston.
Oh, you set that up perfectly. No, it does need to be reformed, though. We need to balance the federal budget. I think. Right. I think that short term, because the central bank, Federal Reserve, is printing money the way that they are, I think short term, hey, things look pretty rosy. Long term, what's long term? 6, 8, 10 years? We're looking at a monetary collapse because of the printed money that's out there. So we have to balance the federal budget. I think we have to do it now. To do that, you've got to reform the entitlements, and that's Medicaid and Medicare. I think the only way you do that is to block grant the states a fixed amount of money, get the federal government out of the health care delivery completely. Those that are poor, welfare, those that are over 65, block grant the states 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice. And, Alan, I think that's exactly what you'll have. You'll have some fabulous success that'll get emulated. You'll have some horrible failure that will get avoided. But that's how we're going to balance revenues with expenditures. And as governor of New Mexico, I absolutely believe that I could have done this, that I could have delivered, that I could have effectively had a health care safety net for those poor, and that I could have effectively...
So you believe in a safety net on a state level, but not on a federal level?
Well, I believe in a safety net. I believe that there are those that are truly in need and that but for a government, maybe they don't receive the goods and services that they should. I just think we've gone way over the line when it comes to those truly in need. So how do you sort that out? Federal government's incapable of it.
But to simply say, just to go back to what launched this conversation, that because of this bombing in Boston and the fact that this family got help, therefore we got to shut down immigration. We have to look at student visas and stop people from Muslim countries coming into this country. We got to change immigration. This is a reaction.
That's to me that's a hysterical reaction, and it isn't based on reality at all. Look, we need immigration reform. I think we should make it as easy as possible for somebody who wants to come into this country to work to get a work visa. Don't build a fence across the border, because that's a waste of money. And I'm talking now about being a border governor and the fact that if you build a 20-foot fence...
You have a 21-foot ladder.
It's a fact.
Would you then have open borders?
Well, we don't want criminals in the country, and we also want taxes to get paid. I'm advocating, eliminating income tax, corporate tax, abolishing the IRS, and replacing all of it with one federal consumption tax. I'm embracing the fair tax for just purposes of debate.
That's a whole other issue.
But the taxes become a non-issue because nobody avoids paying one federal consumption tax.
I'd like to get into that with you, but going back to immigration, and when you say anybody should be able, who's not a criminal, should be able to come here and get a work visa.
Yes.
How do you know if they're criminals or not?
Well, that there is a background check conducted. Yeah. That's part of it. That needs to be part of it.
So, no fence, no border security. If you want to come here, you come here. We just have to make sure you're not a criminal, and then you can come here and do whatever you want to do.
Well, if there's jobs, there's jobs. And now I'm back to this tax reform, too, that I'm talking about. I see that as the solution to the creation of tens of millions of jobs in this country that wouldn't otherwise be here.
Why would having a
zero corporate tax rate? Zero corporate tax rate. No corporate tax. No IRS. No more income tax. One federal consumption tax. Why would you start up a business anywhere on the planet other than the United States given a 0% zero corporate tax rate environment. And I'm going back now to Obama arguing, let's reduce the corporate tax to 33, and Romney saying 28 because it'll create millions of jobs. Well, how about taking it to zero? Let's just go for tens of millions of jobs.
So there's no federal income tax, no state income, or could states be able to have taxes?
States, this is the only federal tax. States would be left to still tax.
I mean, the property taxes to pay for schools?
State taxes. Those are state taxes, not federal taxes.
All right, so there will still be taxes, but on a state level, county level, city level.
Yeah. No more withholding from your payroll checks. Social Security, Medicare, unemployment, that would come out of the proceeds of the fair tax.
I always felt, though, that a consumption tax hurts those with less money because they're going to have a harder time with consumption in the first place.
So you're absolutely right with that criticism. It's regressive. So the way the fair tax deals with it, and it would be terrific to have a debate and discussion over best way to implement one federal consumption tax, but the way the fair tax deals with it is it issues everyone a $200 a month prebate check. So you and I and everybody in the country gets $2,400 a year, which is an unavoidable amount of consumption tax that you're going to pay up to the point of the poverty level. That's how the fair tax deals
with it. Why give
$2,400
to someone who's a multimillionaire? Why give them that amount of money?
Well, you brought up the issue correctly that a consumption tax is regressive. This is how the fair tax deals with the regressive nature of the fact that it's a consumption tax.
So $2,400 doesn't go very far if you got a family of 6, 12, 8,
It's the tax. It's the tax paid on unavoidable.
So you're talking about you say the government gives a check of $2,400, or your taxes?
Check. No, you get a $200 a month check, which
should cover your taxes for necessities, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
So that's
the consumption tax on necessities: food, clothing, shelter, transportation.
And you believe that would be paid for by the amount of money coming into the government on consumption? And if you're buying something locally, does that money go to the state government? Does it go to the federal government?
Well, this would be a federal government consumption tax of 28%, and the 28% actually ends up to be cost neutral, because if you use a can of Coke as an example, a can of Coke has arguably 28% non-transparent embedded tax in it. That would be corporate tax. That would be unemployment, Medicare,
Can we count on
Coca-Cola
to lower the cost of a can of Coke?
Well, when it comes to Coke anyway, this is a competitive industry when it comes to Coke. Coke will sell the can of Coke for 79 cents as opposed to $1. And
once Pepsi does it.
Well, they all will because it's competitive.
We're going to take a quick
break. Because Safeway will.